Spoilers, 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 spoilers. Please do not listen to this episode of QFD if you are not caught up on Season 8 of Game of Thrones. I am doing this the day after the episode titled The Bells aired. So you have been warned. Do not listen to this. Everybody else, I have gotten a lot of requests today, and it's because of a post I made. Granted, it's immediately after a fairly controversial episode aired in Game of Thrones, and that's not unusual for this kind of show. The show was created ostensibly by George R. R. Martin. The idea was to take fantasy tropes and subvert them, and he did a very successful job of doing that. And the reason it's controversial is because some people think it's great writing and that it's been foreshadowed and set up, and now the payoff is coming in. And a lot of people think it's really bad writing. And since this podcast is kind of about exploring storytelling, I thought, this is a really good example to kind of see in real time how to analyze something. And I wanted to do it before the next episode aired, because if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If I'm right, I'm right. I don't want the opportunity of hindsight to go. And of course, just like the Long War, I reserve the right to be completely wrong at any given time. So I'm also going to need to apologize up front. There may be more filler words in this episode than normally, although that is a bad habit of mine, because I'm doing this completely off the cuff. I haven't done hardly any research at all, and this is going to be very stream of consciousness, and we're just going to analyze kind of a question that's lurking out there. Is Game of Thrones ruined because of what occurred in the Bells? And I could have written a really long blog post about this, but honestly, I'm behind my word count for today. And as I sat down to do my second writing session, I could only think of Game of Thrones. So I was like, you know what? I need to just get this off my chest and record this and get this out, because this is exactly why I decided to do like the red dash alpha messages of QFD, was so recording one of these takes a lot less time than sitting down and writing a blog post. And frankly, it'll probably reach more people. But in any case, we'll start talking about is Game of Thrones ruined because of the writing and of because of the events that happened in the Bells. And, this breeze is strangely warm for me. A dragon is coming, or I'm a fool. Cut the bridges!
Skybird, this is Dropkick with a red dash alpha message in 2 parts. Break.
5, 4, 3, hands on keys, turn. So what could happen in an episode of Game of Thrones that could drive literally a rift through people? Now, granted, this is a much more good-natured rift than, say, Star Wars, although there are people out there already trying to politicize it, saying that it's an attack on feminism, which is patently idiotic. And for the most part, people can agree that this season, not the strongest season of Game of Thrones. And we are going to talk about that. That's going to be the whole thrust of this show. But the thing that's driven that rift is Daenerys Targaryen and her character arc. Now, among two camps, well, for those of you who need to be reminded, or if you haven't seen it and you're spoiling yourself, shame on you, Daenerys attacked King's Landing with her entire army, with the armies of the North, the Unsullied, and her dragon. And for my money, it's the best. It's the best depiction of a dragon attack on a medieval type city I've ever seen. It's amazing. It's really, really good. As far as that goes, I don't think there's any controversy on that front, right? Is that, hey, this is a dragon attack. It's horrific. It is incredible. It is a strategic bomber / A-10 attacking a medieval army, right? And the ships too, and doing damage. It's pretty spectacular and horrific to watch. It is spectacle, right? I don't think anybody is arguing that. The argument stems from Daenerys burnt King's Landing to the ground, right? And with it, a lot of people. I think at one point in the episode, they said that there were close to 1 million people in King's Landing at the time because Cersei was banking on using the people as human shields against Dany, and was bringing people more into King's Landing as ostensibly as refugees, but they were really hostages. And Tyrion points that out at one point in the episode. So what occurs is that Dany pulls off a pretty good attack, and I particularly enjoyed how, you can get her dragon when they're not paying attention and it comes from off screen, and it's very unlikely that the dragon would not have seen Euron's fleet from, 2,000 feet up or however high they were up. But you can ambush the dragon. But when the dragon can see you shooting at it and know that it's coming and they've got a plan, well, it's the difference between taking a SAM pot shot at a passing plane and taking a SAM pot shot at a pilot that knows you're taking a SAM pot shot at them. And has ECM and all kinds of other stuff, right? So it doesn't work out too well for people. The Golden Company gets frankly owned by the dragon, and elephants would not have made a difference. So Cersei can be somewhat satisfied in that she had saved a little bit of coin by not having the elephants. And what happens is Tyrion has made a deal. He's sent in Jaime to tell people that if the bells start ringing, that means that's a sign that the city has surrendered and that everyone is to stand down, right? So the bells start ringing. They see shots of Lannister soldiers dropping their swords. People have given up, right? And the regular people, the small folk, as Martin refers to them, are just absolutely terrified. I mean, they've never seen a dragon before. It's real bad news, right? And the bells start ringing in the city, and there's a pause. And there's everyone's kind of catching their breath and everything. And then Daenerys kind of loses it and, enraged, burns the city to the ground. And we are talking men, women, children, innocent people all over the place. And she is doing that, right? So now the controversy arises. There are two camps. One camp feels that all this was foreshadowed, and this was actually in character, and we shouldn't be surprised, should have seen it coming. There's another camp that thinks that this was like a heel turn in the wrestling world, right? They have a thing where like a guy who's supposed to be a good guy turns heel, which means bad guy, and no one sees it coming. It's kind of he betrays somebody in the ring or something. And that's what people see is that, okay, we have one episode left. This was the penultimate episode of Game of Thrones. We have one episode left. They need a villain, and it's going to be Daenerys, right? And she's gone insane. That's a big argument that they have, is that she's followed after her father, the Mad King's footsteps. She's gone insane, and none of this was foreshadowed, and it is terrible writing. I am obviously biased against one side, which I think will come out as I talk about it. But we are going to talk about the other side because there is kind of this big elephant in the room. Now, to those of you who feel that Game of Thrones is ruined because of bad writing in this season, I feel you, man. I feel your pain. There are other shows that I have walked away from, the most painful of which was Lost for me. I was absolutely 100% positive that there was a purpose behind everything and that everything would make sense by the final episode. I even thought they were going to put out a tie-in book to address all the mysteries and stuff that they weren't able to get to. And it turns out the creators of Lost were just, making stuff up by the seat of their pants, and they had no plan, and it wasn't going anywhere. And the final episode was so lackluster that I hold a grudge against those creators unto this day. I have also walked away from Westworld, partly because I adored that show until towards the end of the first season, and I saw trends surfacing, which I gotta say, Season 8, Game of Thrones, some of those same trends are there. So I saw a trend surfacing that led me to believe this is Lost, repeated. I'm not going through this again. We get so emotionally invested in characters and shows. It's hard to distance yourself, right? And Game of Thrones is run for 8 seasons. It is a pop culture phenomenon. I mean, how many water cooler conversations, fan theories, blogs, Reddit posts, all this stuff speculating on what was going to happen, which very honestly, we shouldn't have done as fans, because the whole point of the show, and I don't want to say the show, the whole point of the books that George started writing was to subvert fantasy tropes. He puts a paladin, a very honorable paladin, in kind of a realistic medieval modern world, even though it's fantasy, and we see what happens. He gets his head chopped off. He doesn't last very long. And constantly the show did stuff like that. The Red Wedding, there's dozens of examples, frankly. So, but we do need to talk about the elephant in the room. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because if you feel that Game of Thrones is ruined, are you going to tune in for the spinoffs? Lost had no spinoffs, really, right? Lost is over. It's done. If you hated it, you never have to watch it again. But Game of Thrones is hosting spinoffs. There are prequels. There are other books coming out. There's all kinds of stuff. This is a big franchise. And if you leave people with a very bad taste in their mouth, which, well, at least some viewers feel that way, you've got a problem. So we need to talk about that. So first, I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to do 2 parts. I'm going to kick it off with the camp that this is not bad writing, or at least in Dany's arc. It is not bad writing. It is foreshadowed, and we should have seen it coming. And it's actually fulfillment of everything she said she was going to do. And we're going to start with that, and then I'll kick it over to Other Mike, and Other Mike is going to take the opposite view, right? So let's start out. And what kind of kicked this off is I made a Facebook post, and I'm just going to read it verbatim here because it encapsulates what I feel, right? So what if there was a story told from a certain point of view about a power-obsessed person who destroyed and killed anything that got in their way, sometimes for the good of many and sometimes for selfish reasons? And what if this person was desperate to be loved and really needed universal love, but then found out that they were more likely to be hated, and not exactly because of what they did, but because of what their ancestors did? And what if this person had suffered terrible abuse throughout their life, and at the moment they believed they had regained some form of stability and love, after losing a host of dear friends and relatives, and with the end goal within sight, they almost lost it all? And what if this person showed such tyrannical traits when they got angry that almost everyone near to them tried to stop them at one point or another, which this person then interpreted as a betrayal? What if this complex character, whose family had a history of mental illness, had a moment of power to get revenge on one of their most hated enemies, and then in a fit of rage lashed out at all those people that had caused such hurt, lost control, and destroyed everything? And then what if the story shifted points of view right at that moment, at this character's nadir, and told the story from the point of view of the victims instead? And then who you thought might have been a hero might have been a villain all along, if seen from a different point of view. I give you Daenerys of the House Targaryen, the first of her name, the unburnt, Queen of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Queen of Meereen, Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea, Protector of the Realm, Lady Regent of the Seven Kingdoms, Breaker of Chains, and Mother of Dragons. And I probably should point out that it might be due, probably not, but it might be due that it was Mother of Dragons Day and nobody got her anything, so she was salty about that. But we're just going to go with this argument, right? So we should have seen it coming. It was all foreshadowed from the get-go. I'm going to read you a couple of quotes from Dany. These are, I don't know exactly what seasons. I think it's season 2 and some other ones, right? So I will take what is mine with fire and blood. When my dragons are grown, we will take back what was stolen from me and destroy those who have wronged me. We will lay waste to armies and burn cities to the ground. Turn us away, we will burn you first. Right? So that's just 2 of them, right? Another one, I will crucify the masters. I will set their fleets afire, kill every last one of their soldiers, and return their cities to the dirt. Right? Now, arguably, these are all things that she said when she was dealing with folks in Essos, right? Who had slavery, and we're basically trained to look at them as villains, as worse, and all that is kind of told from Dany's point of view. We never see a rival point of view from the city masters or anything like that, right? We never see how they might see her as a foreign conqueror coming in and taking their stuff and changing their lifestyle. So we only see her as from her point of view, which is a liberator. And she does that. She goes in, she liberates the cities of Essos, and, there's many of them. There's Karth, Astropor, Yunkai, Meereen, Phase Dothrak, which really is a city, but she didn't really destroy it. She just kind of destroyed all the calls. She has a history of doing this kind of thing, right? This is not a surprise. She's actually rather fond of burning people alive, right? So in season 1, she burns Miri Mazdur, the witch. Now, granted, had it coming. And that's the difference, is a lot of these people have it coming, right? So season 2, Dany burns Karth, the warlocks in the House of the Undying, which there is something that happens in that House of the Undying. She's having a vision, like kind of a dream. She sees Khal Drogo and her kid, who are already, gone, and she knows it's a kind of hallucination. But the beginning of that hallucination starts with her walking through the Red Keep and looking at the Iron Throne. And the Red Keep is destroyed. It's a ruin. And there's snow falling. Well, we thought it was snow. It could be ash. If you go back and look at that episode, it absolutely could be ash. She burns Astapor. Let's see, I'm trying to think of she crucifies the masters of Meereen, right, to pay back because they crucified all the children. So it's some form of justice, but it shows that she is ruthless. She burns whatever Meereenese nobles are left. Viewed through a certain lens, you start getting that the resistance that was trying to assassinate her might actually be a resistance trying to get rid of a tyrant, right? She burns all the Khals in Vaes Dothrak, and she burns the wagon train, which that's not, I wouldn't say she could have just left the Dothraki to handle business, but she didn't want to leave it through, and so if she has a bunch of A-10s and strategic bombers, why not use them? And she burns the Tarleys, right? She does without a trial. She's just like, bend the knee. Oh, you didn't bend the knee. Cook, right? She does not believe in half measures. She doesn't believe in compromise. Every single time that she is faced with a problem, her gut instinct throughout the entire show has been to go in there and kill everybody. And she's been warned off. She has had close advisors to temper her worst nature, right? In fact, in one of the early episodes, Sir Barristan Selmy has to intervene with her and tell her that, hey, you are behaving like your father, right? Knock it off. How many times has Tyrion told her, hey, you don't need to, there's got to be a solution without you killing everybody, right? That's her go-to thing, is just to threaten people with certain death and death by burning, right? And go to the most violent resolution. That is what she wants to do. And we get to see a couple of different things happen. So she makes it to Westeros. She's been told, right, by like Illyrio and a bunch of other sycophants and stuff, that when she gets to Westeros, the people are going to rise up and love her. And Dany is desperate to be loved. That is a character flaw of hers, right? Is that she is desperate to be loved. When she goes into Meereen, when she goes into these other cities and everything, the slaves, we see it only from her point of view. So the slaves adore their Misa, right? There was this whole controversial thing that all these people came and raised her up and called her Misa and everything. It was this whole viewed politically, it looked like a white savior narrative. And what it actually turned out was like, hey, they filmed that scene in Morocco, and when the extras go out, hey, turns out a lot of people are brown in Morocco. That's just the way it works out, right? So it wasn't a political statement at all, but it reflects on, she's kind of a narcissist. She needs to be loved. She needs to be adored. And a decent sign of seeing what happens there is that when she frees people, she's not letting them go to like live their own lives. It's not like, oh, hey, you are now slaves no longer. You can go on and do whatever you want. Or Unsullied, you're no longer Unsullied, like peace out, like you can disperse. No, it's, you're no longer slaves to those guys anymore. Now you work for me. But that second part isn't stated, but that's what winds up happening. So she makes it to Westeros. Turns out people are kind of wary of a Targaryen because of her ancestors. She's not loved. And people don't fear her. And people don't adore her because they don't know what she did in Essos, right? And Dany rightfully feels some credit. She's like, hey, you should give me more credit than this. Like the Dothraki never got on ships, ever. But they did because of me. Like all the different things that she's done, right? She deserves credit for. And Westeros is like, nah, you don't deserve anything because you're not one of the people in power right now. So she takes over Dragonstone, and her first instinct when she does that is to go take out King's Landing. She's got 3 dragons at this point. And she's talked out of it. She listens to her council. She listens to Tyrion. She listens to Jon Snow. She goes north to rescue them. One of the dragons winds up getting killed, right? So she decides, she's seen the whites. She knows what the threat is. She decides she's going to go up and save the North and save all of humanity, right? Because the Night King and the whites are such a huge threat. And so she goes north against her better instincts. She really feels Cersei is the one that she needs to deal with. And against those better instincts, she goes north. Jon even explains to her, hey, Northerners don't like strangers, right? That's why you're not getting any adulation. You're not getting any love. She comes and helps them fight the White Walkers. Her dragons do work, right? And at the after party, who's getting love? Jon Snow. Daenerys is sitting by herself with the infamous coffee cup now that everybody's got to know about, that was left accidentally in the scene, right? She's already sinking into depression. And what has driven her entire life, is that she's destined to be the ruler. She is the rightful heir, right? She even mentions it when her brother gets killed by Khal Drogo. Very coldly, she's just like, nah, he was no dragon. Dragons don't get burned by fire. She just, he wasn't the true one. He wasn't the chosen one, right? Or whatever. And then she finds out that the guy she's in love with, who turns out to be her nephew, which doesn't bother her because Targaryens, that's how they roll, is the rightful heir. She doesn't even have the best claim to the throne. That's got to do something to somebody. That shatters her worldview. And then within a very short period of time, she loses another dragon, which is her child, right? And then her best friend and confidant, the man who loved her truly for who she actually was, flaws included, dies in her arms after after fighting to the death to protect her. She loses everyone. And then she has a very telling conversation with Jon Snow. Now, before she has this conversation with Jon Snow, we know she's depressed. She's not in her right state of mind. She has not been seen for days. She has not taken food for days, right? She's not eating. She's not seeing anybody. Jon goes to see her, right? He even is concerned about her mental state. He says she shouldn't be left alone. He knows there's something wrong, right? All her advisors know there's something wrong. Throughout the entire show, her advisors have either tried to betray her or what she sees as betrayal because it's from her point of view, right? But maybe they saw a tyrant in the making. All the way, and Varys even says it all the way up until he turns crispy, he goes, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I deserve this. But he knows, even as he's saying it, he's not wrong. And Tyrion also knows he's not wrong. There's no trial for Varys. There's no point of view. It's, hey, you crossed me, you burn, right? So she has a very telling meeting with Jon Snow. Jon comes in and he says that he's going to be 100% loyal to her and she'll always be his queen, right? And she goes to what she needs. She needs love, right? And she needs love, and she couches it in the terms that she needs love or fear, right? Because that's how she's going to rule. And she comes on to Jon. Jon doesn't return her affections. And very tellingly, she says, all right then, let it be fear. And she starts saying stuff that is frankly villain material, right? She says, mercy is our strength. Our mercy towards future generations who will never be held hostage by a tyrant. That means she's kind of already written off the people of King's Landing. She even asked Tyrion why the people didn't come and join her, right? When she did this in Essos, people rose up against the masters for her. And all she had to do was roll into the city and take credit, like in Meereen, right? So how come the people in King's Landing haven't come up to her, haven't overthrown Cersei for her? So she's starting to rationalize in her head that they're complicit. And my friend Liz posted on a thing a quote that I thought was fantastic. It's paraphrased, right? But it's, hear me and rejoice. Soon you will have the great privilege of being saved by the great Titan. Some of you may think this is suffering. No, it is mercy. Now that quote comes from the Maw in Avengers Infinity War. And he's talking about Thanos, which, if you tell that story a different way, Thanos is the protagonist, right? And I think that's what they were trying to do with Daenerys, is we are seeing a villain, a complex character, not black and white, shades of gray, that we might be able to relate to sometimes because people aren't 100% evil most of the time. And that's what's going on here. And her whole thing about fear and love, that is very clearly influenced by Machiavelli. And I'm going to read this quote. This comes from Machiavelli, the Prince. I think it's chapter 17. And it goes like this. Upon this, a question arises, whether it be better to be loved than feared or feared than loved. It may be answered that one should wish to be both, but because it is difficult to unite them in one person, it is much safer to be feared than loved. When of the two, either must be dispensed with, because this is to be asserted in general of men, that they are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous, and as long as you succeed, they are yours entirely. They will offer you their blood, property, life, and children, as is said above, when the need is far distant. But when it approaches, they turn against you, And that prince, who relying entirely on their promises has neglected other precautions, is ruined, because friendship that can be obtained by payments and not by greatness or nobility of mind may indeed be earned, but they are not secured, and in time of need cannot be relied upon. And men have less scruple in offending one who is beloved than one who is feared. For love is preserved by the link of obligation which, owing to the baseness of men, is broken at every opportunity for their advantage. But fear preserves you by dread of punishment, which never fails. And that is a key motivation in what Dany does in King's Landing, by slaughtering a lot of innocent women and children and innocent people. And there's this whole talk that Dany went insane, and we didn't see a drop in insanity. And we will talk about that later. We didn't see a trend towards insanity. But people lose it over road rage, right? And she had lost so much in such a short amount of time, and she's traumatized. And what do you think happens to the next city after she burns King's Landing to the ground? They will bend the knee. There will be fear. There's no talk about, well, maybe Jon might be the next, the rightful heir. No one's going to dare to define her. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why she did that. Now, over to you, Other Mike. Okay, well, so what are the arguments that it wasn't foreshadowed? Well, at every turn, Dany tries to do the right thing, right? She liberates the slaves. She only attacks people that go against her. She really has not attacked. She is ruthless, right? But she's never attacked innocent people. She has always been a champion of the people. That's part of her identity. She always goes to bat for the little people, the small folk, as George R. R. Martin puts it, right? And this kind of came out of left field. And yeah, you can cherry pick this comment or that comment that she made, but she was essentially talking smack. When you say things like, oh, hey, we're going to burn your city to the ground if you don't capitulate, it's a strategy, right? It's a tactic. And she didn't mean that she was going to do that. And the proof is she didn't burn any of those cities to the ground. She never did any city like King's Landing. This is out of character for her. And it's it's bonkers, and it's a sign of bad writing. In fact, we're talking about a character that when her dragon the dragon didn't accidentally kill a little kid. The dragon ate it, right? Ate this little kid. She locked up all of her dragons so they wouldn't cause undue problems, right? And severely handicapped herself by doing so. She showed mercy and clemency time and time again. Most notably to Jorah Mormont, who we have to remember wasn't just a spy. He hadn't just betrayed her. He was actually like part of a plot to have her killed, and he didn't get burned alive. So, she shows mercy. She does have some tendencies, but when she buries the guy alive, that's because the guy betrayed her, and along with her servant, and had her dragons essentially and her sold to the masters in the House of the Undying. It's like he had it coming. Everybody had it coming until the bells rang at King's Landing. The fight was over. They had surrendered. Dany could have easily just flown up and basically taken out just the Red Keep and killed Cersei, and nobody would have blamed her for anything. They would have just been like, well, Cersei had it coming, right? And her turning and going bonkers on the civilian population unleashed her armies that gave them free rein to sack King's Landing. And we see them trying to rape and pillage. Well, we see at least one soldier trying to do that, and Jon Snow kills him. But for sure, it was already going on, And from there, it's a free-for-all. It's completely out of control. People are dying all over the place. So it's a sign of bad writing that this, they needed a new villain because for whatever reason they have an agenda where whoever's going to wind up on the throne, my money is on Jon Snow, who's going to have to kill Dany, and it all hinges on what Ned Stark said about whoever pronounces the sentence has to swing the sword. I would hope that it kind of comes full circle like that, but we have to also realize that Game of Thrones is about subverting expectations and taking fantasy tropes and doing away with them. In any other fantasy story, this is an example, in any other fantasy story, each one of the Starks having a direwolf pup would have meant something. It would have paid off. It doesn't in Game of Thrones because he was counting on you to put more value into Ghost. Jon doesn't even hug him in a controversial, not even a pet goodbye. Just, see you north of the wall. Get out of here, right? And I'm going to, I'm sorry, but that's the arguments I have against it being bad. I happen to believe that it was all foreshadowed and we should have seen Dany's snap coming. But I will also argue that I don't think Dany is insane. She is not the Mad King. She didn't just burn King's Landing she did burn it out of rage and in a moment of passion. So if she is any kind of insane, I would say it's a temporary insanity. It's not quite the Mad King Targaryen, right? It was a temporary insanity built by all that grief and all the loss that she suffered. And she was just like, here is just payback. And she's lashing out at everyone. In my mind, she was without restraint. And it wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, Jon saw it. Jon said, we have to fall back. We have to fall back, and started making the armies fall back because she was so unrestrained. She would have burnt her own people. And that's very, very clear. But I would also argue Dany is not insane. She is a conqueror. Now, from the onset of the show, the showrunners and George R.R. Martin have compared her to Joan of Arc, to Lawrence of Arabia, to Napoleon, to Alexander the Great, right? Her being the leader of the Dothraki puts her in a Genghis Khan type scenario. The way she negotiates with the cities, you will surrender to us or burn. That is a Genghis Khan tactic. He used to go up to cities and say, you have two choices. You can surrender or die. And if people surrendered, they became, slaves and vassals or whatever of Genghis Khan. And if they didn't surrender, he killed everything. He would create this circle of death, and they would kill everything inside the circle. This is historical. Alexander the Great did the same type thing. Napoleon did the same type thing. William the Conqueror. When you get a conqueror, right? When you get somebody who's obsessed with power, who's going to conquer things and do what it needs to take, they burn cities to the ground. That's what happens. Cities get sacked. When armies attack cities, they are not in control. They lose command and control. We have historical examples of Christian armies, Crusaders on the way to the Holy Land, not even there yet, sacking Constantinople, a Christian city, right? We can take it all the way up to modern day. If you have strategic bombers and the enemy doesn't, you're going to use strategic bombers, even though they're not going to change the outcome at all. You're going to use them out of spite. And in that respect, I would say that Dany is less insane and more like Lyndon Johnson. Right? Linebacker wasn't going to win the Vietnam War. They already knew that when they did it. How many tens of thousands of people died? Right? And that goes on. Stuff like that happens. And Dany's very, very shrewd. And so she does that. Right? So I don't think she's insane at all. Now, next episode may prove me completely wrong. But there's still a huge elephant in the room, right? Is Game of Thrones done because it's badly written? And and I know it's taken me about 40 minutes to get to this point, and I appreciate those of you who have stuck with me. And I would say, I don't think Game of Thrones is done. But I do think the writing has suffered. Just in the episode The Bells, right? We got a bunch of fan service with Clegane Bowl that really had no outcome on the episode. Now, it was fun to watch. It was a good, it was the definition of fan service. It impacted the story not at all, and it gave fans what they wanted to see. They wanted to see Clegane Bowl, so they got Clegane Bowl. But we got an entire scene with Euron and Jaime that absolutely had no purpose. Euron just kind of comes out of nowhere, attacks Jaime, they fight, and the only way that scene would have made any kind of sense at all is if Euron killed Jaime and went on to do something else. But he doesn't. He dies. So you could have just killed Euron on the deck of the ship when it was strafed by a dragon. It would have changed nothing. Use those extra 5 minutes of the fight scene and show us a little bit more of Dany descending into madness or descending into depression, or show some soldiers taking pot shots at the dragon after the bells have rung. And she's like, oh, you guys didn't surrender after all. It's a ruse. And she just burns the city to the ground, right? You could have done anything with that amount of time. Instead, we got this kind of lame fight between Euron and Jaime that I don't think anybody was actually clamoring to see. And yeah, Jaime was wounded pretty badly, and he just shrugged off those wounds. Like, those wounds didn't matter at all. So there's a lot of bad writing. There's a lot of, and in the previous episodes, we can talk about that. I'm not going to, because this episode's already a lot longer than I wanted it to be. But, the whole tactic situation at the Battle of Winterfell, there's all kinds of problems, right? So why is that? And this is my hypothesis, right? So we have to look at the structure of Game of Thrones. We have to kind of meta out. And instead of looking at what happened to these characters and the actual plot points, we have to meta out and look at the structure of the show. And what we get is a series that, when conceived, was probably not even remotely imagined to be as popular as it would become. And we get kind of a weird structure. So we get season 1 through season 6, I believe, are 10 episodes apiece, and they're about equal length each one, about 60 minutes each one, right? And then we get really 13 episodes, right? Season 7 is 7 episodes and season 8 is 6 episodes. I haven't done the math. They could actually be the same running time as previous seasons, but there's something telling that happens in season 5 and midway through season 6. So season 5 is the last season where they have Feast for Crows, Dance with Dragons, and an outline kind of synopsis from the Winds of Winter. And for those who don't know, those are the actual books that George R.R. Martin wrote that the show Game of Thrones is based on. Game of Thrones is actually only the title of the first book, and they took it for the entire series. So season 6, they have some outline stuff from Winds of Winter, and that's when you start hearing these articles that, George R.R. Martin told the folks at HBO how it was going to end, right? And I think he did tell them how it was going to end, but it was very loose. It was very, very loose. And the reason is, and we're going to talk about this difference in media, is that there are two kinds of writers, really, right? There's plotters and there's pantsers. And listeners of this podcast will have heard me talk about them before, but for those who are new to this, I'll cover it, right? So plotters are the kind of writers that go out, they create an outline, they have a story arc. The most stringent plotters know every beat of the story, they know every scene, they know where the rising action is going to be, they know where the climax is going to be. They figured everything out, right? And they usually have some kind of program or plot grid on their wall or something that has, lines of this character is going to have a turning point here and all this stuff. And they figured it all out. And then there are pantsers. And pantsers are the type of writers that sit down and they fly by the seat of their pants. That's where the term comes from, right? They're pantsers. And they develop kind of a mental sandbox. Like, hey, what if you had a medieval society that was like fantasy, but all the tropes are subverted, right? All the stuff is subverted, right? So they set up these parameters of this sandbox and then let their characters play in there and develop and figure things out, right? To the point that some pantsers roll dice and use RPG tools to figure out what's going to happen because they literally don't know. And that is their way of tapping into their subconscious so that they can tell a story. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I would bet money that George R. R. Martin is a pantser. And the reason I would stake that bet is A Feast for Crows. And that was the fourth book, and it is extremely disjointed. It is all over the place, and it is covering characters that we really don't care about or know about. It's a bunch of secondary characters and stuff. And this is like a little kind of secret, but it's not really a secret, but if you're a pantser and you're writing your story and you kind of get stuck and you don't know where to go, the easiest thing to do is to add another character, because now you're just like, hey, I'm at ground zero again. I can fire this off and start exploring this whole other thing. It's almost like another story, but you're still in the sandbox of Westeros, right? And so things are still connected. You're still coming up with ideas, and it's not useless. If you have to go back and cut all that stuff later, maybe you came up with a really good passage about so-and-so's ancestor in Highgarden or something like that you can use somewhere else. Now, pantsers need a lot more revision than plotters, right? It winds up taking about the same amount of time when you look at it overall. It's whether or not you want to do all your stuff on the front end or whether or not you want to do all your stuff on the back end, right? So that's part of the reason, I think, why the books take so long. And folks who don't know, George R. R. Martin started writing Game of Thrones, the Song of Fire and Ice, in the 90s. And he was supposed to have the books done, but unfortunately, HBO caught up. I think they even delayed one of the seasons so that he could put out Winds of Winter, and he wasn't able to make it. So we have this issue, right? So that is in the novelist world, right? But now it's adapted for television, and we have a major problem. Because in the world of television, you cannot be a pantser, right? I suppose there might be some shows that could be pantsers. The only one I can think of, honestly, is Lost. It comes to mind because these guys were just making stuff up and had no idea where it was going. They were just making stuff up, and they were making enough money that it could go somewhere, right? And you contrast it with a show like, say, Breaking Bad, where that's very much plotted out. You know, they already knew how it was going to end. Twin Peaks might be a pantser show, but I really can't think of a show that's a pantser because it doesn't work in television. Why? Because in television, you have a set number of episodes, and you know this from the moment they give you an order, especially on a channel like HBO. They go, hey, you're going to have 10 episodes. So you have to take the content that you have, break it up in 10 episodes, and you have to plot it out because they need to know, hey, in episode 7, we're going to have some major dragon scenes, right? Well, that's budget problem, right? And so what are we going to do? Well, we can shoot episode 4 so it all happens indoors and on a back lot, and we don't need to spend a whole lot of money. Okay, so we'll take money from episode 4 and we'll put it towards the dragon scenes in episode 7. And they have to figure all this out and schedules and all this stuff because you've got a massive cast that's spread all over the place. And you're like, oh, well, hey, we need all these people in Belfast by this point. We need all these people in Morocco. We need all these people in Spain. You need to figure all that stuff out. You cannot be pantsing it, right? And so from season 1 through 4, it's kind of easy because you have the material, right? Season 5, it starts getting harder because Feast for Crows, a lot of it is unusable. It addresses characters that you either haven't introduced or that the audiences don't care about. You would have to cast all these new people. So they only use some things from Feast for Crows. They mostly cover like Dance with Dragons and start laying in some groundwork because George is ostensibly halfway through Winds of Winter, right? So he can tell you, well, this happens and Brienne does this and Arya goes off and does that. And this is what happens, right? He can even let you read it. And it's in rough draft form or first draft form, hasn't been edited, but the content is there. Then comes season 6. And you're like, hey, man, we need to know what happens. And George sits down and tells you what happens. And he's got a very loose outline, but the characterization falls off. Right? He's just like, oh, well, Dany makes it to Westeros and this happens and this happens and this happens. But we start losing the characterization because where's that characterization coming from? It's coming from George R. R. Martin's subconscious, right? Where these characters are playing around in this sandbox, right? And so there was no plan. There was no end goal because George just kind of is like, hey, let's just have everybody play in their sandbox. We know that eventually this is all going to have to do with who's going to sit on the Iron Throne because we have to have a end goal. And it's called the Song of Fire and Ice. So at some point, the dead from up north are going to have to come south and you know, it's going to be, that's the major conflict. So he starts seeding in all these things, right? These prophecies of the prince that was promised will come in the dawn. And then they start setting up Daenerys like might be that prince or it could be Arya or whatever. And the show is just grabbing at threads that he's thrown out there, but he hasn't fully thought them through because he's a pantser, but he's talking to plotters. And that's where the problem comes from, right? Because then they say, and this is where I think Game of Thrones made a massive mistake. Because when they should have said, you know what, we're going to need more episodes to flesh out these characters, that we don't have all the character development that was in the books. We don't have this kind of shorthand that we can go to. We're now just dependent on plot. We know that this has to happen, then this has to happen, then this has to happen, right? And instead of saying we need more episodes, they went to less. And it's very, very telling. You can see it in season 7. A lot of the criticisms that came up from season 7, like Varys traveling, you know, back and forth through Essos, and it takes him like a half an hour, right? Sending a raven from north of the wall down to Dragonstone is like sending a tweet. Dany's there within half a day, right? There's a lot of these things. The internal consistency of the world starts to fall apart. People are able to travel from place to place with no thing in between. And it reminds me of like a D&D game where the DM is like, okay, we got to get, you know, this session is almost over because Mike has to leave in like 30 minutes and I need to get to this battle. So then they go, okay, we're going to head down to this castle. Well, you travel for 3 days without incident. Right? And then now you're at the battle. Now we can do the thing before the guy has to leave. And that's what's happening in season 7 and season 8, which people are saying are attributing to bad writing. And it's not bad writing. It's a different kind of writing. It's plotting versus pantsing. And they're more concerned with plot than with character. Now, unfortunately, the show we all fell in love with for the first couple of seasons, right? It was kind of this meandering development. Right? A lot of character growth. You got to see, a good example is Greyjoy, right? Theon, is you see him kind of being just a snot and then just worse. Then you feel sorry for him. Then you know, he's the scum of the earth. But then you're like, well, he's been through a lot. And then by the end, you're like, you know what? Theon did some work, man. Like respect. And that's great character development. But that's lacking in these last 2 seasons. And that's what people are keying on, right? Is there is no character growth. Characters have become plot devices. They've become who needs to be at this location, at this event, so that this thing can happen. And the showrunners are just trying to knock out this show. They're just trying to go, hey, we need to tell this story. And my guess is, if I was doing it, what I would do is I would start with the last episode of season 8 and work my way backwards and just go, okay, this is our end point. This is where everything has to wrap up, and we need to go back. What has to happen before that? Well, if this happens, Danny needs to do this. And if this happens, then John needs to do this. And you go backwards and you just start knocking off stuff and everything like that. And then you've got episodes that are massive set pieces, like the Battle of Winterfell and the Bells, right? Huge, huge episodes where has to cover all kinds of things. You have no time for character development. You have to just sit there and hit these marks, and you drop the hints that you can, but everything is secondary to the events. Things have to happen, so this has to go in this way, in this way, in this way. And that's what people are finding disconcerting. So I would say don't give up on Game of Thrones. I don't think it's ruined. I think it's still going to be a good show. Now, a lot of people, I think they've lost a lot of people with some of the events of this season and the last. I think a lot of people are firmly in the camp of the show sucks, and it's bad writing, and I'm never going to go back. And I feel for you. I don't know how to convince you, because I feel the exact same way about certain shows like Lost and Westworld and JJ Trek. You couldn't pay me to watch those, right? So, but my argument is that Game of Thrones is not ruined. It's just different. And if you give it a chance and give it some rewatches, it'll still be one of the best fantasy series ever. And with that, I'm going to leave it there. And Other Mike, take us out. Zaldrizes Buzdarik Sosdaur. Dracarys. You have been listening to Quantum Froth Dispatches by Michael Haspel. Music and other cues are provided by The Fat Rat. The song you're hearing is Monody, featuring Laura Brem. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit www.patreon.com/QFD. Thank you for listening, and we now return you to your mundane reality.